Grossi Posse Packer Nation. Welcome to an episode of Packcast, the podcast where you don't have to be a Packers fan, but it sure does help. I'm your host, Tom Grossi, and today we are going to be talking to a Chargers fan, which, by the way, we have to thank the entire Chargers team and fan base for valiantly and wonderfully beating the Bears last week by 1 point, just so the Packers can have just a little bit more salt to rub in the wound of the Chicago Bears. And so with that, we got a big matchup coming up this Sunday over in LA, and for that we bring on Chargers fan Frank. Frank, thanks so much for coming on, bud.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And, you know, when the season started, like right before it was about to start, this was one of those games that I had circled, because whenever our teams meet, it's usually like a hell of a lot of fun. It's usually a high-scoring affair. And I have a feeling, like, even though you guys have, like, stumbled a little bit out the gate, I feel like every week you're starting to find your groove a little bit more. And, like, I'm expecting this Sunday to be a pretty close matchup.
Yeah, definitely. I think the Chargers are an interesting and also sort of frustrating team to watch, especially because they always seem to find a way to either play down to or up to their competition. And that always results in like a 1 point game, a 2 minute warning, and left sort of scratching your head at the end, thinking what happened. So
yeah, I mean, like, if I'm not mistaken, the last time that you guys played us, it was at Lambeau, and that's when like Phillip Rivers had like an amazing day. I think he threw for 400 yards, and like it came down to like a last second like bat away in the end zone. Like I remember that game being like absolutely insane. And you guys last season were one of the best teams in the AFC, like bar none. Your defense, with Casey Hayward, the guy that the Packers got rid of, but we won't talk about that. With that defense, and the offense was producing. Keenan Allen was staying healthy. You had the great run game with Melvin Gordon. And so if you can, to kind of like walk me back to last season, because you guys were doing so well, and obviously winning in the wild card round, and then getting over into the divisional round facing the Patriots. And like I sat down to watch that game and I was like, yes, here we go. And then by halftime I was like, oh, no.
So last season was it was definitely an exciting one. Finally, I really felt the team was able to come together and, not be really affected by injuries, which has been the story for, the last however many years.
Yeah.
And so the team, they were really able to put it together. Anthony Lynn, it was his second year coaching. He was able to sort of, instill this sort of mindset, this new tough guy attitude sort of that the team really identified with. And it clicked. Unfortunately, it ended a little bit prematurely in New England. But, I mean, it's, they're still a young team, and outside of Rivers, of course. And I still think they have a lot to build on after that year.
Yeah, and so like going into the season, I have to imagine that like expectations were pretty high, right? Like you're like, okay, we get another year of this defense, another year for these young guys to kind of like step up again and grow from last season. And obviously, like before the season even really begins, like obviously the injury bug, like losing Derwin James, like that's huge and that hurts. And then, you have the entire saga with Melvin Gordon, who is like, oh, I'm going to pull another Le'Veon Bell, but of course winds up coming back around mid-season. So I'm like curious of like what your thought process is, because you're heading into week one and you're like, yes, here we go. The injuries happen, the Melvin Gordon things happen. Does that kind of like damper your expectations a little bit, or are you kind of expecting, okay, we still have the talent on the team to succeed?
Well, I mean, as a Chargers fan and someone who's used to those injuries, I had thought that after losing Derwin James in the offseason and Gordon's holdout and Russell Okung having the pulmonary embolism in June, yeah. I thought that they had gotten their injuries sort of out of the way for the year. Yeah. But then, unfortunately, Hunter Henry's lost week one. Adrian Phillips, another big part of the team, lost for the year on week two against Detroit. And, it starts to pile up again, and I'm like, oh, no, here we go again. And, it's frustrating. So.
Yeah, I mean, like, I have to imagine so. And so so obviously, like, your team has been through the ringer, and, like, we're halfway through the season now, and I'm just talking about with the injuries, with the holdouts, with everything going on. So do you kind of, like, fault that and everything that's going on as to why you kind of have stumbled out of the gate a little bit? Like, you've gotten off to this slow start, or do you think there's something else?
Well, I mean, I think that's a part of it, a big part probably, but I think it's tough to say. Play calling has been somewhat lackluster. Ken Wisenhunt was fired this past week,
Yep.
which is probably a direct result of that. But I think it's also hard for any team really when they lose so many key pieces to have to overcome that. You can only have the next man up mentality for so many players.
Yeah.
And it's hard to overcome.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think when you're looking at your team in particular, right, you look at guys like Phillip Rivers, who is constantly like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, who doesn't get a whole lot of like press coverage, but like every year he's there, like, hey, I'm carrying this team sometimes, like this is what I'm doing. And now that you guys have like struggled a bit coming out into the season, like there's starting to be like the media starting to harp on like, oh, like are we about to move on from Phillip Rivers? Like, is this his last year? The fact that you're making that move to LA, like, and actually like being in a brand new stadium, maybe a franchise like brand new draft pick comes with that at quarterback. Kind of what are your thoughts on Phillip Rivers, who has been a staple of your organization for so long? Are you kind of like saying, all right, like it's time to move on because he is the outlier when it comes to like a very young team? He is the older veteran, or you're like, hey, like he still has a whole lot of game left to play?
So Phillip Rivers, he's a little bit confusing for I think most Chargers fans because a lot of us want to see that like young franchise quarterback, someone to look forward to in the future. But at the meantime, you can't really deny that how well Rivers has been playing. There's this conversation every year about, oh, is he too old? Is it time to replace him? But he always seems to prove that narrative wrong in a sense. Even last season, outside of Mahomes and Drew Brees, he was in the MVP conversation for the majority of the year. And he put together what might have been one of his best seasons. And I think I don't know. I think it might be a little bit foolish to just move on so quickly, especially when this team has a lot of other holes that, you never know if you're able to fill those holes, how well Rivers can carry the team.
Yeah, and I feel like what was surprising is because for a while you have been an offensive-minded team, right? Like you've had the Keenan Allen, the Phillip Rivers connection, then you get Gordon. You've had like that firepower, but like slowly but surely through the draft and through some key free agents, you built that defense, especially last season, into one that was really damn intimidating. And I think when you look at this season, that was also obviously you lost some key players, but like I thought that was one of the bigger things too, because like you fire your offensive coordinator, but you look at the defense and you're like, okay, but there's problems there too. Do you think that it's an issue of also coaching as well? And could you see a DC change like coming in the near future?
So I think. I think the team might be a little bit hesitant to make a defensive coordinator change, just given the amount of injuries that they've had on defense. Gus Bradley last season, he put together a very strong defense that was up there with the best in the league. And I think this year it's sort of been a result of injuries and, not really having or sort of forcing players into positions that they might not usually have to fill. And I think he still has a year or two left to really prove himself before the team might look to move on from Gus Bradley.
Yeah. And kind of taking a look at like your short-term future, right? So like the big move to LA is coming. It's next year, I believe, right? Like next year, like you're finally done. Okay, so I find that when, especially obviously last year, but like you have the Chargers who are like killing it in the AFC, and you have the Rams, and they're both to be future like LA teams, and everybody is focusing on the Rams. Is that something that like kind of gets like tiresome of like, hey, there's another team over here, like look at me, or is it kind of like, you know what, keep talking about the Rams, keep talking about Jared Goff, we'll continue to take care of business?
I think the only annoying part about the Chargers being sort of the number 2 team in LA is when you watch their home games and you see the overall number of away team fans
yes
that are in the crowd. So yeah, that can get a little bit frustrating, but I think the Chargers, they've always been, in a sense, a small market team that's overlooked by the media, especially when they were in San Diego. They were never really got the amount of national coverage that another team like, I don't know, the Cowboys or the Giants may have gotten.
Yeah. And it's funny that you brought that up because like I remember vividly a few weeks ago when you were playing the Steelers on prime time, and like I was like doing dishes, like I was in the background, and my wife was watching. My wife was watching the game, or at least pretending to, and like I heard like a lot of cheering, and I was like, oh, did the Chargers like do something? Like, did they score a touchdown and get a big play? And she's like, no, it was the Steelers. Because like that is like, that's how bad it is. So do you think that's just because like it's the current stadium that they're in? Do you think it's because they're a small market team? Because like, yeah, you're 100% right. Like I am very much expecting there to be a lot of Packers fans in LA on Sunday. Why do you think there is such an influx, or do you think it's just because like it's LA and there's so many different walks of life?
So I think it's sort of multifaceted in a way. Well, one, it is LA. It's a really large city. There's going to be a large number of fans from any team that visits the Chargers. But I think another part of it might be actually the ticket prices for these games have been astronomically high compared to ticket prices for other games. Part of that's the team only has maybe half of the seats that other stadiums might have, so they need to get more revenue from those seats. And then another thing that I sort of noticed especially during the Steelers game, is the media coverage of the field usually focuses on the away half side, which I mean it was filled with Steelers fans, but like I think it's sort of not really a false narrative, but it's not really telling the full story.
It makes it look worse than it actually is.
Yeah. It makes it look a lot worse than
that makes it is. Yeah, so. That makes sense, and it also is too. Like this is like your temporary like home, right? Like after next season, you're just like we're not there anymore. So you could at least hope that you're gonna get like different more fandom coming along. And one more thing about like the LA thing. So I've talked to Chargers fans in the past. And it completely and totally varies. Like I've talked to Rams fans and I asked them the same question. So like the move from San Diego to LA, and I find myself literally all of last season, I still called them the San Diego Chargers. I couldn't get it out of my head. I'm like just starting to remember their actual name now. And so like, is that something as a fan that has like, does that bother you? Like I also asked that like of Oakland Raiders fans, like that move, because like for some fans they'll like strike a chord and be like, no, like we should stay in San Diego. And then there's others that are like, no, like it's okay if we move to LA. Kind of where are your thoughts on that?
So it was definitely disappointing when they moved, and I don't think I'll ever be able to get over it. I grew up a Chargers fan, and they'll always be the San Diego Chargers to me. And it definitely sort of broke my heart in a way to see them move to LA. A city that doesn't, I don't know, in my mind, it never really needed one football team, let alone two.
Yeah.
And, just to see now, it's like it seems like the city almost doesn't really care about the Chargers. But, I mean, now it is what it is. They're going to get their new stadium, and there's not really so much you can do about it other than keep supporting the team.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I remember I think it was a couple years ago whenever we played the Rams. I asked that exact question, and I think this was before they were going to move. It was just proposed, and they're if they move from St. Louis, I will not be a fan anymore. And I was like, damn, okay, that. But that's the thing. There is that connection where it's hey, this is the team, this is the community that you've built in this stadium, etc. That has a ton of sentimental and emotional value attached to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it was definitely frustrating. I've been to games in both the old Qualcomm Stadium in San Diego and the new stadium in LA, and it's definitely a different atmosphere. Mm-hmm. Almost. When they were in San Diego, you could really feel how the community sort of came around the team and sort of embraced their own personality into the team, even though they were still a smaller team and they didn't have a lot of fans. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's sort of a different vibe now, and I don't know, it's hard to get used to.
Yeah, sure, it's different. I mean, you're taking this would be if you took the Packers and moved them to a big city. You have these or Buffalo, you have these small community teams, right, that have their own cult following and what have you, and then you're displacing them, and you're oh, okay, that you lose a little bit of your identity with that.
Mm-hmm.
And
exactly.
Yeah, and so when you're looking at kind of the makeup of this current team, one of the big stories that we've touched on already was Melvin Gordon. I'm very curious to kind of just get your opinion on that entire saga, because it seemed the holdout didn't do well for him because Eckler just went off and was I'm just going to score lots of touchdowns now. And he showed that hey, he's a damn good player. And while Melvin Gordon is still ramping up and getting slightly more touches, it may wind up hurting him in the long term, money wise or financially. So I'm curious of your sense of, because there was talks about trading him, then there was talks about him just sitting out for the entire year. For you, are you still a Melvin Gordon fan? You want him on the team? Where's your head at?
So I think the first 4 weeks where Gordon didn't play, I think that really proved something to a lot of Chargers fans that we had known for a year or two, ever since Eckler joined the team, is that Eckler really is a starting caliber running back, and he really fits the dynamic of this team. And I think we were all happy to see him get a chance to prove it on a national stage. But I think, and then that's sort of the frustrating part that comes with the Gordon holdout, was that, we were sort of torn between, two, starting caliber, two very good players. And I think it's been annoying to watch, the past 4 weeks, because, neither of them has really been able to get into, their own groove. And especially Gordon, seeing how he had, I believe it was 8 carries this past week, and 8 carries the first game he came back against Denver. And, he wasn't really able to do anything. The team has been held underneath 40 rushing yards these past 4 weeks since Gordon came back. So, I don't know, you start to wonder how much of that was the holdout, how much of that was Gordon, how much of that is the offense and the play calling. Yeah. So, well, I don't know. I guess we'll see as the season moves on.
Well, you're, again, like you said, you're trying to, okay, you find out in the first month, you're oh, here's our starting, running back right now, because we don't know if Gordon is coming back. And then he comes back, and you're oh, okay, well, he got, double-digit touchdowns, so, he has to get the ball, too. And so now it's, trying to, figure out this weird dance of, you need Eckler to get involved because he's still a great player, and then Melvin Gordon's a great player, so how do you, intertwine that offense and get them both firing where you're going to be successful? And I find that, because of that, you're, in this, weird groove of, I don't know who I should give the ball to more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think... another point I'd like to bring up is actually after a game a few weeks ago, Gordon was speaking to the media, I believe, and he mentioned how 8 touches for a running back is never enough to get into groove. And, I don't know, there was sort of like a collective groan across, Chargers fan base, seeing as how well, Eckler's still been doing, with, while only getting those limited touches. And also the third running back on the depth chart, Justin Jackson,
yes,
who I believe he'll be playing this weekend, but he actually hasn't played since, I think, week 3 against Houston. The first 3 weeks he only had, I believe, 6 catches, or 6 touches maximum. Yet he was still averaging roughly 8 yards a touch.
There you go.
And you hear Gordon complaining about how that's never enough to get into a groove, but Jackson's doing it fine, and he's the third string running back. So what's the
and it gets to a point
problem?
where it's like, hey, well, you know what, buddy, you would have been getting a lot more touches if you just didn't sit out. Like that could have been also solved real easily. And so like at the end of this year though, like there is a decision that is eventually going to have to be made, right? And so for you, like right now, and obviously we have a plenty of season left, but right now for you, like, are you comfortable if Melvin Gordon, walks away, you trade him, before his contract is up, and you're, well, now not anymore because you can't, but like, you know what I mean? Like, are you comfortable with him walking away and just being like, hey, we're going to roll with Eckler and see what we got?
Yeah. Yes. 100%. I mean, we've seen, multiple times this season how, Eckler and Jackson too have both been, 1,000 times more effective than Gordon's been. I don't think he'll be worth nearly a fraction of what he's going to be asking for.
Yeah.
In the off season, I believe they offered him roughly $10 million
$10
a year.
Right?
This past off season, I wouldn't do that, seeing as how he's played so far.
Yeah.
And the Chargers are going to have other key free agents coming up that they're going to need to pay. So.
Yeah, and I mean, like, listen, like, it's a good problem to have. It's just like, oh no, I have all these talented running backs. What do I do? Like, it's not the worst problem in the world to have, but at the same time, you're just like, listen, like, we offered you $10 million and you could have played, but if you don't want to, then good luck trying to find $10 million somewhere else. So,
yeah, and then I think a team will probably bite and give him that, which I don't know what that'll say about that team, but I think that was part of the reason why the Chargers didn't trade him at the trade deadline. And they might be able to get a better compensatory pick given however much Gordon makes this offseason.
Yeah. And looking at the AFC West, the division that you're in right now, so at least walking into this, I was like, okay, so you have two teams that are going to make the playoffs. It's the Chiefs and the Chargers. And, the Broncos are doing Bronco things right now, so, we don't have to worry about them for right this second. And then you have the Raiders who, listen, I'm not going to lie. Like, I'm sure you did. You probably got a little bit of satisfaction and glee out of the whole Antonio Brown saga. You're just like, okay, oh man, he's leaving. Oh, what a shame. You're just like, oh man, taking out my violin here. But like the Raiders like haven't been playing terribly, right? Like they're doing pretty well within the division. So obviously like right now where the Chiefs don't have a commanding lead over the division with the injury of Patrick Mahomes and the defense not playing well, etc. And they've had a number of injuries. Kind of like how do you see the AFC West shaking out for the rest of this season? Do you think the Chargers are going to be able to bounce back and potentially get a wild card? Do you think that it's just going to be like one team from the AFC West? Kind of what are your thoughts on that?
So I think the Chargers do have a good opportunity to bounce back and make it into the playoffs. I think the main road right now would be to win the division. That's obviously going to be difficult given how talented the Chiefs are, especially their offense. But we've seen they've had multiple injuries to key players like Chris Jones, Frank Clark, Eric Fisher, and Mahomes, obviously. So I think given how the two rosters sort of shake out and, whether or not players get healthy in time, I think that'll ultimately be the deciding factor in who makes the playoffs. As for the Raiders, I don't really think they're going to be that good moving forward. Their offense is great. They have a great offensive line. Josh Jacobs has been
he's been good.
Outstanding as a rookie. They have solid receiving pieces with Tyrell Williams and Darren Waller, but their defense is not good.
It's ugly. It's bad. It's just bad. And so, like, looking at that of a potential bounce back, you look at this Sunday, which for you guys, like, is a huge game, right? Sitting at 3-5 right now. If you have 6 losses on the season already, it's kind of like, ooh, okay, like we have to kind of like win out from this point on. And, if you're able to beat the Packers, like that's going to be a huge like boost in what you would hope to be a turning point for the season. So what do you kind of see for kind of how it's going to pan out this Sunday? How do you see like your defense matching up against our offense? Our defense has been somewhat improved on some weeks, depends on when you watch. Like, how do you see this Sunday shaking out?
So, of course, I think this Sunday is going to be a very close game, a lot closer than most people probably think it'll finish. It'll probably come down to a drive by one team in the 2-minute warning. I don't know. That's always how Chargers games seem to shake out for whatever reason, and. I think it's a very interesting matchup between the two, especially because we've seen the Packers offense sort of start to shift from this Aaron Rodgers pass it 50 times a game and let him do his thing to more of this balanced attack with Jones starting to become a star player, and I think. The Chargers defense has struggled at times to stop the run. If the Packers are going to win, it's going to have to come from Jones more than Rodgers, in my mind. Especially the Chargers' run defense hasn't been that good this season. They're missing, right now it looks like the 2 starting defensive tackles for the Chargers, Justin Jones and Brandon Meebane, won't be playing this Sunday. The linebacker core has been somewhat rough this season with the addition of Thomas Davis, who's definitely on the wrong side of 30, to say the least.
Yeah.
He sure looks it. So, and also, the tackling's been very suspect the entire season, even dating back to last year. They've always had somewhat suspect tackling in the run game. So, I mean, I don't know. I think it's sort of tough to say how, the defense is going to shake out against the offense, but I think it'll be a close game.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think a big also key is if Davante Adams is finally returning. I mean, we've shown that we could win because we've won all 4 games without Davante, but you throw him back in the mix and you're like, oh, okay, like this could be good. And that's just like another another threat to worry about, because our receivers, while they're not blowing anybody's hair back at this point, like they're doing enough. And when Rodgers like, what, screw it, I'm just gonna throw to my running backs and get Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones involved in the passing game, and we'll win that way. But I think you're right. I think it is going to be a close game. I would not be surprised if both teams forget how to play defense like the last time that we played, and it just turns out into like a good old fashioned shootout. But that should be one hell of a game, and I'm looking forward to it. It should be a fun game on Sunday.
Yeah, definitely.
So, but Frank, I want to thank you so much for coming on, my friend. It was great talking to you about the Chargers, and I wish you lots and lots of luck, and a big thank you for beating the Bears last week. I want to wish you a lot of luck with the rest of the season, just not on Sunday. And yeah, I appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, well, definitely thanks for having me. I want to thank you too for taking care of the Chiefs last Sunday.
We scratch each other's backs. That's it.
So, I definitely see the Packers going far this year. They look much improved from last season, and yeah, I think they'll have a good one.
And so this Sunday looks to be a sexy ass matchup. I can't wait. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. You can always find me at TomGrossiComedy.com or at TomGrossiComedy on all the social media you see down below. Check out podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, and of course YouTube. And a big shout and thank you to all the Patreon members over at patreon.com/TomGrossiComedy. But thank you so much for watching. We'll do a Q&A tomorrow. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack Go.